Story number 1. I've been a trucker for close to 15 years now. This happened to me back in 2017. I was driving an overnight haul through the Mojave Desert in California, headed toward a destination in Arizona. I think I was delivering appliances, but honestly, I don't really remember. It was pitch black. Darkness in every direction. The headlights on my semi were really dim at the time, and I'd been putting off getting them fixed for months. Usually, it wasn't too noticeable, but out here, where there were no other cars around, it was painfully obvious. I remember having to squint every few minutes just to make out the road ahead. That could have been a horror story in itself. I kept debating whether to pull over and wait for sunrise, maybe sleep a couple hours. But I didn't want to waste time. I desperately needed the money back then. So I kept driving. Even though it wasn't fully safe, I figured I'd be fine. It was mostly a straight line through the desert, and I knew the route well enough. It was about an hour before sunrise when I saw something up ahead, approaching fast in the distance. Worried it might be an animal, I slammed on the brakes. My truck screeched to a stop. And then I saw it. A car. Its hazard lights were blinking. But the strange part? It was sitting dead center in the middle of the road, right on the double yellow. Even weirder, the passenger door was wide open. My truck stopped maybe a foot from hitting it. Now, I'm not one to scare easily. I've been in my share of bar fights, and I don't rattle that quick. So when I saw the car, I wasn't really afraid. Just curious. I figured maybe someone needed a jump, or help changing a tire. So I reversed the semi, pulled off to the side, and parked. I considered throwing some flares down, but decided against it. I hadn't seen a single other car on this road all night. I got out and started walking toward the car. It was a warm, still night. I remember thinking how strange it was that there was no wind at all. Nothing stirred. It was silent, too. Eerily silent. The only sound I could hear was the faint clicking of the car's hazard lights. That rhythmic tick-tick-tick in the middle of nowhere. I walked a little closer. It was a red Ford Fusion, looked fairly new. The passenger door was still wide open. I circled around the vehicle carefully, just in case someone was hurt or unconscious. But when I looked inside, it was completely empty. I double-checked. The back seat. The footwells. Even the floorboards, in case someone had passed out. Nothing. No one. And that's when something shifted inside me. I'd expected a stranded driver, maybe someone who'd pulled over and taken a nap in a really bad spot. But this? This was something else. I started glancing over my shoulder, feeling increasingly uneasy. I kept turning around, scanning every direction. It felt like someone was watching me. Like someone might charge at me from the darkness. But I couldn't see more than a few feet past my truck's headlights. Beyond that, just a wall of black. It was eerie. I stood there for a minute, debating whether I should get back in my truck and pretend I never saw anything. But against my better judgment, I decided to keep investigating. I took a few more steps toward. Inside the car, everything seemed completely normal. The key was still in the ignition, though the engine was turned off. I stepped back out and made my way around to the trunk. Might as well take a look, I thought. I tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. It was locked. So I went back to the front, grabbed the key out of the ignition, and returned to the trunk. I unlocked it, clicked it open, but still, it wouldn't lift. It felt jammed. From the inside, somehow. Getting more curious now, I opened the back passenger door and tried accessing the trunk through the back seat. To my surprise, it worked. The seat folded forward, and I saw what was inside. 3 squished black garbage bags. And a rope. A thick rope was tying the trunk shut from the inside. I hesitated. Then glanced over my shoulder again. Still nothing. Just empty desert. So I leaned in. I must have been within 5 inches of one of the bags when... bang! The loudest gunshot I've ever heard cracked through the night. I slammed my head on the roof of the car in pure shock. My heart dropped. I didn't even think, I just reacted. I threw the keys onto the front seat, scrambled out of the car, and bolted back to my semi. As I climbed in, I heard a voice in the distance. Rough. Grungy. Someone yelling, "Hey," over and over. And it was getting closer. I jumped into the driver's seat and turned the engine. Nothing. It stalled. I cursed out loud, panicking. I cranked it again, finally, it caught. As the truck roared to life and started to pull forward, I saw him. A person, now standing right behind the red Ford. He must have come out of nowhere. He was short and husky, with red hair. He wore dirty overalls and shin-high boots. In his left hand, he held a small shovel. In his right, was an old hunting rifle. We locked eyes. Just for a few seconds, as my truck rolled past. He didn't move. He didn't look insane or deranged. In fact, he had this strange, worried look on his face. As I passed, he suddenly dropped the shovel and began waving his hands. He yelled, "Wait! Wait!" But there was no way in hell I was stopping. I floored it, pushing my semi much faster than I should have. In the rearview mirror, I saw him running after the truck for a few seconds. Then he turned and sprinted back toward the car. He definitely wanted me to stop. But there was no chance that was going to happen. I just kept driving. About 5 minutes passed. I started to think I was in the clear. But then... I saw headlights. Fast. Approaching from behind. My stomach dropped. I swear, I've never felt that level of fear in my life. I grabbed my phone and called the police. Told them what had happened, at least, the best I could explain through the panic. While I was still on the phone, the car was suddenly right on my tail. It started honking like crazy. Blasting the horn, over and over, like he was trying to scare me off the road. I had no clue what to do. So I just kept driving. Praying to God he wouldn't try to ram me. He followed me like that for 15 minutes, right on my bumper. Then, suddenly, he cut in front of me and slammed on his brakes. I had to hit mine hard, just barely avoided crashing into him. And that's when I saw it. Flashing red and blue lights ahead. A patrol car. The Ford swerved hard to the right and tore off into the desert, disappearing into the dark. I pulled over immediately and waited for the officer to reach me. When he did, I practically exploded with the whole story, rushed and panicked, but I laid out everything I could remember. But instead of going after the guy, the cop just stood there, taking my statement. I told him, twice, that he could probably still catch up to him if he left now. He just shook his head and said not to worry. Told me they'd do a thorough search once backup arrived. Then he sent me on my way. Said they'd call if there was ever an update. They never did. I've told this story more times than I can count. None of my buddies have ever had anything this insane happen to them. And I know what you're probably thinking. That guy was definitely burying bodies. I've thought it too. But it doesn't explain everything. Like why he had such a small shovel. Or why the garbage bags in the trunk were too small to fit a whole person. Some of my friends think he was dismembering them. Cutting people up. For my own sanity. I like to believe something else. Maybe he was burying a diseased animal. Maybe he was putting down a rabid dog. Or tossing a few venomous snakes out there in the middle of nowhere. I don't know. But whatever the truth is, I've never felt comfortable driving through deserts late at night again. Not after that night. Story number 2. This happened to me about 3 months after getting hired by my first trucking company. I was basically as new to the trade as you could get. That night, I was driving from southern New Jersey to Lafayette, Indiana. A 12-hour haul. Now, 12 hours might not sound too bad on paper, but keep in mind, I had just finished an 8-hour delivery trip before that. So by this point, I was running on fumes. Still, I wanted to get my deliveries done as fast as possible, so I chose to drive through the night. According to the GPS, I'd reach Lafayette just before 3 a.m. The first few hours were smooth. There were barely any cars on the road, which meant I could push the semi a little faster than usual without worrying about traffic. About halfway through the drive, I reached down to grab a Red Bull from the center console. But there weren't any. Of course. I had forgotten to restock my truck after the previous delivery. I slapped the dashboard a couple times in frustration and groaned. I hated making stops. It might sound weird, but I always felt exponentially more tired the moment my truck wasn't moving. Even short stops, 30 seconds, a minute, it didn't matter. I'd get groggy almost instantly. I glanced up at the navigation and sighed. I had no choice. Either pull over to get something to keep me awake, or fall asleep at the wheel. In my mind, those were pretty much the same risk. Reluctantly, I pulled into the first service stop I came across. I had no idea where I was, probably somewhere in Ohio by then. But it was too late to second guess. I was already turning in. That's when I realized, this wasn't actually a proper service stop. It looked like an abandoned gas station with a repurposed convenience store built onto it. I don't know if there's a better way to describe it. Just a crumbling, half-forgotten place in the middle of nowhere. I spotted another small quick-stop store a little farther down the road, but I figured I'd check this one first. So I parked the semi and walked over. To be totally honest, I expected one of two things to happen. Either the door would be locked, or the place would be open and empty. But that's not what happened. The door swung open easily. Into a pitch-black store. I stepped inside, hesitant. I looked around, hoping, just maybe, I'd get lucky and find a forgotten drink or snack. Just as I was about to turn around and leave, my eyes began adjusting to the darkness. And that's when I noticed it. A faint glow, way off in the back corner of the room. Curious, I made my way toward it. The glow was coming from behind a slightly ajar door. A back room of some sort. Against the far wall inside, was a refrigerator. Plugged in. Still running. I felt a weird kind of relief. I was actually smiling a little as I stepped inside. Eagerly, I opened the fridge door. But it was completely empty. Not just of drinks or food, completely empty. Even the shelves had been removed. The whole appliance had been gutted. And then, as I shut the fridge door, I was about 90% certain I heard something, a clatter from the main room. Like something had hit the floor. I froze. 10 full seconds passed. Had I imagined it? There was no way to be sure. Everything was silent again. Slowly, I crept back into the main room, straining my ears. I looked around carefully. But, nothing. No sign of anything out of place. Part of me wanted to keep investigating, to dig deeper into what I thought I'd heard. But the smarter part of me reminded me I didn't have time for this. I turned and walked briskly out the entrance. Basically jogged, if I'm being honest. I made my way over to the second shop I'd seen down the road. It was open. Thank God. I bought a drink, paid quickly, and rushed back to my truck. The whole stop had left me with a weird feeling, like something was just off. I didn't want to linger. I needed to get back on the road. Fast. Before climbing back into the truck, I took one last glance at the abandoned store. That's when I noticed it. The door, the one I was absolutely certain I had shut, was now standing wide open. There was no way I'd left it like that. But whatever was going on in there, it wasn't my job to figure it out. I got in the truck, started the engine, and merged back onto the highway. As I drove, the caffeine from the drink started kicking in, cutting through my exhaustion. My mind began to wander. And then it hit me, how bizarre that whole situation really was. A squatter in an old building? Okay, that wasn't too far-fetched. But the refrigerator? Still plugged in, gutted, glowing in the dark. I couldn't explain it, no matter how many theories I tried to come up with. I pushed it out of my mind and focused on the road. But that's when something else started happening. I noticed movement. In the curtain behind my seat. It started slow, like a soft billowing. I felt sweat bead on my forehead. I stared at the rearview mirror. The curtain, it moved again. There was no air conditioning on. No wind. No reason for it to be swaying. And that's when the thought struck me. There was someone in the truck. With me. My heart slammed in my chest. I didn't have a weapon. Nothing to defend myself. Trying not to make any sudden moves, I discreetly picked up my phone and punched in the nearest police station. The next 20 minutes felt like an eternity. Every second, I imagined a hand reaching out, grabbing me from behind. I pictured someone lunging, trying to crash the semi. But somehow, I kept driving. And finally, I saw it. The police station. I pulled the semi as close as I possibly could to the entrance and jumped out. I ran to the building. Within seconds, officers were pouring outside. They surrounded the truck, weapons drawn. I unlocked the back, stepped aside. And what they found will haunt me for the rest of my life. The police pulled out 3 people. Homeless, by the look of them, 2 men and 1 woman. They were wrapped in filthy blankets and tattered clothes, their faces hollow and sunken. One of the men had 2 switchblades on him. Not one of them said a word. But all 3 stared at me with a look I'll never forget. Cold. Hateful. Almost hungry. They refused to talk to the police. Wouldn't explain how they got in. Wouldn't say a thing. And honestly, I don't think I ever want to know. What they wanted, what they planned to do. I'll never have an answer. But after that night, I always check my truck. Every single stop. Every single time. Story number 3. My name is Kevin. I've been a trucker for various companies for the better part of 15 years now. Things have become pretty routine at this point: pick up the goods and materials, verify them for accuracy, and deliver them as instructed. We're not paid by the hour, so efficiency is the most important thing in this line of work. For someone like me, who's been doing this forever, I like to think I can outwork all the young guns snapping these jobs up. This isn't always a great thing, though. Usually, I push myself to the absolute limit, functioning on barely any sleep. About 4 years ago, I was working for a warehouse based in North Dakota. For anyone who doesn't know, North Dakota is one of the flattest states, which makes trucking a little easier. This also meant that skipping out on a few hours of sleep could be the difference between keeping your job and getting the sack. It was a chilly Tuesday morning in May. The beginning of the week meant more loads needed to be shipped, which meant more work for me. I wanted to knock it all out in one shot. So I traced my route into Montana accordingly, planning not to stop even once to sleep. I hit the road a few hours after lunch, expecting to reach my destination very early the next morning. I pushed the semi as much as possible, maybe doing a couple miles over the speed limit. It was getting late, and I remember rubbing the crust from my eyelids as the clock ticked past midnight. I was having trouble keeping my eyes open, but I only had about an hour left on this drive. So I gritted my teeth and kept going. My buddy Tristan, who was also a trucker, introduced me to smelling salts when I first started out. If you don't know, smelling salts are basically some kind of crystals in a little bottle. One sniff, and you're wide awake. You had to be careful, though. Too many back-to-back uses could be dangerous, or at least that's what Tristan told me. They burn your nose a little bit, but whenever I needed a boost, I'd reach for the smelling salts first. This was one of those times. I took a big whiff and shot my head back, my reflexes taking over. I felt the adrenaline course through my body and hoped the feeling would last the rest of the drive. A half hour shot by, and I was really struggling. I felt myself starting to doze off, and the blare of my truck drifting into the shoulder jolted me awake. This was getting dangerous. I thought, I have to pull off. I was all alone on the highway, but there was nowhere to pull off. Just woods on either side of me. I slowed the truck down, searching desperately for somewhere to stop. At this low speed, my headlights pierced through the darkness, letting me see a lot more. As I looked around, I saw something that confused me. There was a purple dress lying in the middle of the road. What the hell? I thought, rubbing my eyes. Was I hallucinating? I blinked like 6 times just to make sure I wasn't going crazy. It was real. I approached the dress with my truck and stared at it as I rolled by. In hindsight, this should have been more of a red flag. But I think I was just too exhausted to process what was going on. About 200 yards ahead, I passed a pair of shoes lying on the side of the road. Now, I was starting to freak out. What the hell was going on? I kept driving and passed the shoes, silently praying to God there would be a place to pull off soon. My old man, David, was a super religious guy, so I clutched his old cross tightly in my hand, hoping he would come through for me. A little further up the road, I saw more random clothing scattered around. Some of it looked like little kids' clothes. This time, I stopped the truck. Panic started to set in. Something was very, very wrong. I sat in the driver's seat, the truck at a standstill, expecting something to happen. But it never did. So, I followed my instincts. I stepped out of the truck and went to inspect the clothing. I still remember the chilly morning air piercing my skin, which helped snap me out of my exhaustion. I approached the pile as cautiously as I could. It was indeed kids' clothing, both boys' and girls' pieces mixed together. I looked around into the woods, but I couldn't see much in the darkness. My head was on a swivel, worried this was some kind of trap. I decided it wasn't my business to figure out what was going on, so I made my way back to the truck. Just then, I heard a crunch from the left side. I whipped around, trying to see what was there. I stood there, waiting to hear another sound. After about 30 seconds, there was another crunch, but this time from the opposite side of the road. My survival instincts kicked in. I sprinted toward the truck, jumped into the front seat, and slammed the door shut. But just before I could lock it, I heard a child's scream ring out. I froze. My heart was bursting out of my chest. I was caught at a crossroads. I wasn't about to fight some random people in pitch-black woods, but I couldn't just abandon helpless kids either. Before I could make a decision, another almost identical child's scream rang out. Without thinking, I turned the truck on and pointed it toward the spot in the woods where I heard the noise. My headlights lit up about 30 yards into the trees. There were 3 or 4 people, one holding a massive speaker. They ducked behind a couple of trees as my truck lit them up. I caught just enough of a glimpse to realize what they were doing. They were hiding from the light, holding a speaker, trying to lure me into the woods with a fake kid screaming. I was in shock. I just sat there, staring at the trees those people had just disappeared behind. I reached for my phone to call the police. But before I finished dialing, I heard a thump against the body of the truck. Someone had thrown something from the other side. That was it. I was done. I turned back to face the road and slammed on the gas. As I sped off, I could make out a person on the other side of the road. He shouted something I couldn't understand before launching something at the truck. It cracked the glass of my passenger side window. I drove the final hour in silence. I was too scared to process what had just happened, but there was no way in hell I was stopping to sleep in those woods. I completed my delivery and then knocked out. I must have slept for 10 hours straight. When I woke up, the first thing I did was call the police. They told me they'd investigate those woods and keep me updated. Then I thought about the whole thing, how stupid I was to get out of my truck. I should have just minded my own business. But the thought of some kids being kidnapped or worse was just too much for me to ignore. To this day, I still have no idea what those people were trying to do. I don't know why they didn't rush me when they had the chance, or what they planned to do if I ran into the woods after the screams. After all my years of being a trucker, nothing has ever come close to being as strange, or downright terrifying, as this experience.